Yeah. Floyd House Flicks. What's going on, you guys? Blacks in Cinema Sunday today. Thank you for having me back. We haven't done a Blacks in Cinema Sunday in about 2 weeks. Is that it? Maybe three? I'm not quite sure. But I'm here. Blacks in Cinema Sunday, Floyd House Flicks, and today's feature film, Sparkle, 1975, starring Irene Cara and Lonette McKee and Philip Michael Thomas. There's so many people in this movie. Um, you got Mary Alice. Mary Alice plays the mother in the movie. Her name is Effie Williams. She was the second Oracle in the Matrix, if you remember, when the first Oracle, she passed away in real life. She passed away. So Mary Alice took her role. Mary Alice has been in film, shucks, before I was born. Mary Alice was in so many different films. You have Philip Michael Thomas, as I mentioned. Philip Michael Thomas, of course, from Miami Vice. Big deal. And for all you gamers out there, he was in Grand Theft Auto 3. No, Grand Theft Auto Vice City. He was in Grand Theft Auto Vice City. Great game, if I do say so myself. And Lonette McKee, she was in so many movies. I mean, like she was in a bunch of. She was in Richard Pryor films. Lynette McGee was a busy, busy actress back in the '70s and '80s. She's still with us. But this film, Sparkle, I'll give a brief synopsis. Uh, it begins in Harlem. Of course, it seems like a lot of my movies that I choose for Blacks in Cinema Sunday all seem to take place in Harlem. I need to mix it up a little bit, but that's just, I guess it's the Harlem boy in me, and that's what I do. In Harlem, New York in 1958. It follows a girl group, Sister and the Sisters. That's original, which was made up of three sisters. Sister is actually one of the sisters' names, played by Lynette McGee. Sister, Sparkle, and Dolores. Styx, who's played by Philip Michael Thomas, is interested in Sparkle, the younger sister, and he helps them put together a girl group. But of course, they once they had some success, they were then confronted with the realities of fame and popularity, and sometimes what that entails is danger and drugs and all of the sort mixed company type things. You get involved with people who don't have anything positive to bring to the table. So once that happened, sister, the more fair complected of the two sisters, started to take off into drugs, and she was with this. He was a street guy, bad news dude. His name was Satin, and that's a bad news cat, and he was played by no, Tony King, and he was a bad dude, man. He was beating her up, and he was doing it to her, man. It was something terrible, and of course she fell into it and then couldn't find her way out. She wouldn't let anyone help her. Her sisters tried to help her. Everyone tried to help bail her out. But once you get caught into the pit of addiction and abuse, it's a hard way to go. I implore anyone who's dealing with that sort of thing, please find help. There are a lot of resources out there, and I know the first step is to understand that you are dealing with something that's beyond your control. So please find help for abuse and addiction and all those things. But as I move forward, this movie came out in 1975. And I mean, to be in Harlem at the time and to see this sort of movie, you get to see this was happening everywhere in Harlem. A lot of people in Harlem were looking for a way out of the ghetto, a way out of what was deemed poverty. Um, and this was one of the ways that we got out. This film was directed by Sam Osteen. Warner Brothers released it in 1975. And it was sort of like a take on the Supremes, if you will. I don't know the Supremes' backstory in terms of how they got together and how they wound up at Motown. But I have to imagine that as three black women growing up in poverty, their growth was quite similar to what the storyline is based on. Um, so as uh, Sparkle and sister and the other sister are performing, as I said, they get some kind of fame, and then the main character sister gets caught up in the drug game. She gets caught up with a very bad guy, and he starts beating on her. She comes to the shows, and she has black eyes and all sorts of stuff. The only way that she finds that she can cope with the abuse is to start further abusing herself with cocaine. He introduces her to cocaine. The Satin character introduces her to cocaine and other things that are just going to make her life more complicated. But she doesn't see a way out, and she doesn't even see it coming. And she won't accept help from anyone. Her sisters are trying to help her. Styx is trying to help her. Uh, it's just a mess. Um, and of course, eventually, as their careers start to soar a bit, sister gets really involved and she loses herself. And then one of the sisters leaves the group because she can't deal with sister and her problems, and they have an effect on them as a whole. So she winds up leaving the group. But before she leaves the group, she tries to get Satin busted, tries to get him arrested. So she involves herself with one of Satin's right hand men. She seduces him enough that where she can get information out of him. The guy gives up the information. She calls the cops and tries to set up Satin. But something that she is not aware of is one of her good friends works for Satin. And instead of Satin going to the drug pickup or whatever it was, he sent him. And her friend wound up getting shot. Now, he didn't get killed, but he got shot. And he went to jail because of her. Maybe not so much because of her, but maybe because of him. But he wound up going to jail for that. And then Satin is looking for who snitched on him or who dropped the dime, as the term goes. Who dropped the dime? Who told on me? That's what that means. Somebody's told on them. So he winds up confronting Styx, and then he and Styx get into it. Now I'm surprised in this movie that Styx put hands on this cat. Styx put hands on Satin, and what makes it really funny is he won the fight. Usually in films like this, when the bad guy comes after the good guy doesn't always win. 9 times out of 10, the good guy winds up gone, and that's what happens. But with this, he put hands on him, and he won that fight fair and square. And Satin never came after him again. And but as the film went on, Sister, they wind up seeing in lounges and in dive spots, and she's singing, but she's still getting high, and she can't stop getting high, and she can't get her life together. And then fade to a church scene with Sparkle, played by Irene Cara. Sparkle is singing in the church, singing Precious Lord, if I remember correctly. She's singing and she's singing her heart out. And then the camera pans down and it pans down over Sister's casket. And all you see is this young, beautiful woman, young, beautiful black woman laying in this casket, gone. It doesn't say how she died, but it is to be assumed that she died from, more than likely, from her addiction. Life wasted. We see that all the time in a lot of places. Life wasted. Um, and it was heavy because back in my era, when I was a child, to see someone waste their life away only seemed to concern us in our community. It didn't really concern everybody else outside of our community because it just seemed like that was normal in those types of communities and those people's communities. That's what happened. Flash forward to today, where we're dealing with an an opioid epidemic. It was weird and coincidental. Richard Pryor had a joke, which wasn't really a joke, but it was a joke. He said when I'll say what he said, white people see, and I'm not, please don't take this wrong way, but it's just the irony of the joke. He says when white people see black people in their communities suffering through drug addiction, and he's like, oh, it's so sad. Oh, that's terrible. But when it happens in their communities, it's like, oh my God, it's an epidemic. It's the exact same thing. It's the exact same thing. Richard Pryor's joke was that when it's in our community, it's sad, but when it's in their communities, it's an epidemic. Current day, we're dealing with an opioid crisis. We lived through the crack era in New York City, and the crack era was not deemed an epidemic. The crack era was deemed a black people's problem. Now, I'm just saying this because this is where I grew up, and this is the conversations that I would hear. This is a black person's problem because it took place in our communities. So, they didn't really care, and they were arresting crackheads left and right. People were going to jail, and nobody was trying to help these drug addicts. They were sick. And before crack, of course, there was heroin, and nobody was helping them either. So, and that's the era that Richard was talking about, the heroin epidemic. That was an epidemic, but no one discussed it that way. It wasn't looked at that way. So when the opioid epidemic happened and people outside of us as black people started to die, it became a crisis. It became something that people were looking at in terms of, we need to fix this. It should always have been looked at like that. And then you look at, if you go deeper down the rabbit hole, you look deeper down the rabbit hole and you find that, these narcotics and these drugs are coming from somewhere and being inputted or transported to our communities. Inputted is not a word, don't hold me to that. Transported to our communities and just inserted is the word I was looking for, into our communities, along with guns and everything else. And you put people in a bad spot, and that's kind of what happens. And I say put people in a bad spot because they wouldn't allow us to live in a lot of other places. But I'm not going to go too deep into that. But what I'll do is I'll go back to Sparkle. After Sister passed away, Styx, everybody decided to leave New York because they were tired of the foolishness. They were tired of the violence, the drugs. They were tired of everything. So a lot of people left New York, except for Sister, her mother, Sparkle. And that was it. Everybody else left or was in jail. So when they decided to get things back together, Styx came back to town. They didn't decide. Styx came back to town, and he wanted to get Sister, or rather, he wanted to get Sparkle back into the studio and help her to start her career again, or a solo career. So he did that. He made all the connections that he needed to make. He had conversations with people. It was this one guy whom he borrowed $10,000 from, and this guy was in a restaurant. They had a meeting in a restaurant. The gentleman was eating matzo ball soup. It's in the movie. He's eating matzo ball soup. He says, "Have you ever had?" He's offered him. He says, "Would you like some soup?" And Styx says, "No, I'm fine." He says, "You must have never had matzo ball soup before." He's like, "No, I never have." He's like, "Okay, that's why I knew you said no soup." So they sit down and they're eating matzo ball soup. He borrows $10,000 from him, 16% interest. Styx agrees. The career takes off. She has a hit. Her first single is a hit. He pays back the man the $10,000 plus the 16% on time. And that's when he dropped the boom on Styx and says, "Okay, the people that I borrowed this money from want you to keep it. Consider it an investment." And now they want a piece of this young girl, this Sparkle. They want a piece of her career for the rest of her career. Now, this is, whether you want to know this or not, this is the same conversation that Kanye was talking about when he speaks to the music industry, the film industry, and everything else. They try to strong arm their way into, or give you a really crappy contract, and then you're stuck for the rest of your career. You get nothing back. You own nothing. You do everything through it. Now, it's a similar conversation. So Sticks is having a conversation with this gentleman. He's like, I don't want that. I gave you back the money on time. Do they want more interest? What is it? He's like, no, this is what they want. And he's like, well, I'm not doing that. He says, I borrowed the money from you. The people that you borrow the money from, that's your conversation, not mine. He's like, no, but you have to understand, these people do not take no kindly or lightly. So he's like, no, I'm not doing it. And he jumps out the car, and the guy's like, Sticks, Sticks, try to bring him back. Now, of course, what happens to Sticks is he's standing outside of Carnegie Hall because this man created a situation where Sparkle was going to open up for Ray Charles at Carnegie Hall. It was going to be a big old deal. So they're standing outside. He's standing outside looking at the marquee. He's looking at the marquee. You see the reflection in the glass. You see him looking into looking at the marquee, and then you see this suit walk up behind him. We all know what happens then. Traditionally, we all know what happens then. He gets taken. Sparkle's performing, but before she went on stage, she was like, "Where's Sticks?" He's like, ugh. Her mother is like, "You know him. He's always doing something, but he'll be here." So she's performing on stage. They show Sticks in the car with some grumpy dude next to him, and Sticks looks scared. He doesn't know what's going on. So he's riding in the car, and they wind up, and the whole time Sparkle is singing, but they ride to wherever they ride. And then next thing you know, you see a gun next to Stick's head, and they're playing what looks like Russian roulette with him. They're trying to get him to give them part, whatever it is they want. And you see the finger on the trigger pull. You see the chamber rotate, click. Sticks shakes his head like this, like no. Then they do it again. You see the chamber of the gun click. And Sticks shakes his head no again. Now, he didn't have anything. He did this. He said no. He put his life on the line because of Sparkle, because of his faith in Sparkle, and because of his honor and his what am I looking for? His integrity was on the line, and he was not going to allow these people to move in on what was going to be good for Sparkle and try to make this good for them. So his loyalty to Sparkle, that's what it is. It was his loyalty to Sparkle. He wanted to make sure that she was going to be good and get what she deserved because they owned it. So no, he shook his head no. Cut scene, they show one of the guys walk up to one of the main looking characters, and he looks at him and he looks at him, and the guy just shakes his head no. And the guy just starts laughing like, these fucking guys. I said it, I cursed. Oops. He said these guys, like these guys, these people, what is these people type of thing. And then it cuts away back to Sparkle singing at Carnegie Hall. So she's singing, and the mother is on the side of the stage watching her sing, and fortunately Sticks walks in. Sparkle continues to sing, Mom and Sticks hug, and Sparkle singing, and then the film goes off. Well, that opened up the conversation all by itself. The conversation that they were having is very similar to the conversation that Kanye has been blacklisted for. His conversation about people wanting something for nothing based on a contract or based on what they call an agreement, verbal or otherwise, and not being willing enough to admit it or at least give back. That's what Kanye is talking about. That's what Sticks had to deal with in this movie. That's what a lot of people have to deal with when it comes to the entertainment industry, whether it be film, music, whatever it is. Those contracts that people sign, most times I know the people in our communities, in Black communities, when they get these opportunities to sign these get these big deals and do all of this stuff, sadly, a lot of them don't read their contracts. It's sort of like when you get something online, when you order something or when you buy something, and they have to send you this whole contract, and you have to check that box, and you say, "Am I going to read this?" I don't know too many people that actually read the agreements because they're long, and they're long for a reason. They're long to make you not read them. Nobody wants to read all that. So they scroll down, they click the box, and they go on with their day. Sadly enough, in the film and music industry, if you don't have representation or if you have the wrong representation, you do the same thing. 9 times out of 10, it was the wrong representation, especially back in the day when people signed contracts and got involved with people that were going to pretty much rob them, and they didn't know. They just looked at it like, I'm going to get this car, I'm going to get this advance, I'm going to get all of this stuff, but they're not really looking at the big picture. So these are things that they wind up walking into. In future terms, they wind up broke. There are a lot of old school artists that are broke because they got involved with the wrong people, got involved with the wrong contracts, and got involved with the wrong situation. And they broke to this day and have nothing to show for it besides people knowing their songs. Shit happens. But Sparkle. I enjoyed this film. There was a sequel made in 2012. It was actually, I think, Whitney Houston was in the sequel. Whitney Houston played the Mary Alice role of the mother. Whitney Houston did. And then this was her last movie. She died. Jordan Sparks was in it. I forget some of the other cast, but that was an immediate replication of this movie. I didn't really care for it too much. I thought it was okay. I thought this one was so much better. But they did it, and Whitney Houston's last film before her passing. So if you haven't seen Sparkle, please check it out. It's a great movie. Again, I'll go back to saying, if you have if, if you have any issues, or you know someone that has issues with abuse, whether it be physical or mental, if you know they're dealing with drug illness, whatever they're dealing with, I understand the struggles of seeing that and being around that. All you can do is advise them to get help. If you are the person that is listening to this and you need help, please get the help that you need. Life is precious and time is fleeting. You have to make sure that you take care of yourself. There are several resources out here. There are suicide hotlines, there are drug addiction hotlines, there are all things. Please don't allow something to push you off your square to make you decide to make a bad decision. That's not a great sentence, but I think you know what I mean. Do what it is that you need to do. And if you can't do it, please try to find the help that you need to make yourself whole again. It's not easy, but nothing worthwhile is easy. Always remember that. I'm going to wrap this up. Thank you guys so much for joining me. Blacks in Cinema Sunday. I'll be doing this again next Sunday. I haven't picked a film yet, but when I do, you will be the first to know. All of you, respect, salute. It's my birthday today. Send me some happy birthdays. I appreciate it. All right, guys, take care. God bless. Floyd House Flicks.